Welcome. This week's topic is on nutrition tools, and this segment will be covering recommended intakes. The dietary guidelines are updated every 5 years. The last updates were in 2015, and we'll see updates again in 2020. The key guidelines for the most recent dietary guidelines are to shift away from a focus on nutrients and specific foods, and to focus on eating patterns. The guidelines are follow a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan. Now, it's not what you do on one day or 1 week, it's what you do throughout your life. Focus on variety, nutrient density, and amount. It's important to eat a variety of foods that are nutrient dense, consuming more nutrient dense foods, and limiting nutrient poor, calorie rich foods. And this leads us to our next guideline, which is limit calories from added sugars and saturated fats and reduce sodium intake. This essentially means to limit processed foods. Some sources of saturated fat are actually not unhealthy, and we'll talk about this when we are reviewing lesson 5. So you want to shift to healthier food and beverage choices. This means limit soda and beverages with sweeteners and added sugars, and drink more water. Support healthy eating patterns for all. So everybody has a role in healthy eating. This is the community, the schools, and families. The dietary reference intakes are essentially a set of nutrient recommendations that are generated for the United States. And they're taken from research, and the DRI, which is the Dietary Reference Intake Committee, and they establish these guidelines based on their review of research. Now, when determining how many nutrients we should eat a day, the Food and Nutrition Board, the Institute of Medicine, the National Academies review the research. They determine the EAR, estimated average requirements. The EAR is the average needed for individuals for each nutrient. Then they determine a recommended intake, and this is called the RDA, or Recommended Dietary Allowance. Now, I'll talk more about how they determine this allowance in the next video. Now, when there is adequate evidence to establish an intake recommendation, an RDA is established. When there is not enough evidence to establish an intake recommendation, then an estimated guess is made, and it's called an AI, or adequate intake. Lastly, we have our tolerable upper intake levels. Now, most people think that the safety margin is this big margin, but in fact, the safety range is actually quite small. So there's actually a point where you would be getting too few nutrients, but then also that you can get too much of one nutrient. And this is mainly going to happen with fortified foods and supplements. So take a look at the list of RDAs and AIs in this chart. You can see that the plain type with an asterisk is the adequate intake, whereas the values in bold are RDAs. Notice that the values for micronutrients change based on age and gender. There are different recommended intakes values throughout life, and it's whether an individual is male or female. And then also notice there are different recommended intakes for pregnancy and lactation. So to review, the RDA, or Recommended Dietary Allowance, is based on solid scientific evidence. When there is not enough research, and it's either there haven't been enough studies or maybe they don't have the quality of studies, we call this the adequate intake. That's an AI. It's an educated guess. So let's move on to macronutrients, our energy yielding nutrients. We were just discussing vitamins and minerals. That was micronutrients. We have recommendations for each of our 3 macronutrients. Now, these are called the AMDR, the acceptable macronutrient density range. Carbohydrates, it's 45 to 65% of the diet. For fat, it's 20 to 35% of the diet. For protein, it's 10 to 35% of the diet. I have 10 to 15% in parentheses because that's what most Americans only need. 10 to 15% of their diet to be from protein. So notice these values are in a range. So 45 to 65 of the diet. For fat, 20 to 35% of the diet. And remember, these are your macronutrients. So these are energy-yielding nutrients. Okay, so what does this look like? If you're going to have a diet that was 45% of carbohydrates, 30% fat, 25% protein, so that would be in our lower end of our range for carbohydrates. Remember, it's 45 to 65%. This diet would look like this. Now, remember, these values for carbohydrate, fat, and protein are always going to add up to 100%. Now, if you're at the upper end of the range for carbohydrates, that would be 65%. This is the total calorie contribution to the diet. Then fat and protein intake will go down. In this example, we have 20% for fat and 15% of protein. This diet still meets the dietary guidelines for macronutrients. Let's move on to My Plate. This is the government's guide to food groups. And one of the things I think is fantastic about this is it gives you a very good visualization of when you put food on your plate, which food groups should take up which portions of the plate. And look at fruits and vegetables. They really are taking up about half of the plate. That's a very good standard to go by. What I'm going to mention is the way My Plate is set up is that protein is usually consisting of more meat and fish. And so if you are a vegetarian, you might have more beans, legumes in this area. You know that also could be tofu. For grains, there are some people who don't eat a lot of grains. It doesn't have to take up this much, but in place of that, it really should be vegetables. And although there's a dairy group, some individuals are lactose intolerant. You don't necessarily need to have dairy. So what I've done here is show what we need to have 45 to 65% of carbohydrates from the diet. So that's our recommended range. So which of these foods are carbohydrates? What makes up a carbohydrate? Well, everyone would guess grains, right? And then if I said a potato, you would also say that would be a carbohydrate as well. And that fits into our vegetable category. But fruits have sugar, and sugars are carbohydrates. And there's dairy. Dairy has lactose, and that's also a carbohydrate. Now let's take a look at protein. Remember, the recommendation is 10 to 35%, but most Americans only need 10 to 15% of their diet to be from protein. And getting plant protein is definitely fine if you're not a meat eater. We generally think of, meat, fish, poultry giving us most of our protein. But again, beans, legumes are a really good source of protein, and the dietary guidelines emphasize consuming more plant-based proteins. We're going to get protein from vegetables, and grains have proteins as well. Dairy is a very good source of protein. Fruits don't have much protein, although there might be tiny bits of protein in there. Okay, so lastly, let's look at fats. 20 to 35% of your diet should come from fat. I think a lot of us think about fat on meat, say on a steak, as contributing to a source of fat. You'll also have fat in dairy. Grains, though, can definitely have a little bit of fat, very tiny amounts in vegetables. Fruits, such as an avocado, have healthy fats. And then if you think about seeds such as flaxseed will give you healthy fats, omega-3 fatty acids. Nuts will give you omega-3 fatty acids as well. So the nuts and seeds will give you very good sources of fat, and of course, oils. Oils are going to be a very large contributor of fat in the American diet, but say olive oil is a healthy fat. The processed, refined seed oils that come in processed foods are not very good to add to your diet. So I have this cartoon here, and it says you need 5 cups of fruits and vegetables a day. at least 5 cups. So that's a minimum? Yes, you need to consume a minimum of 5 cups of fruit and vegetables a day. Most Americans get less than half. Okay, that's it for this lesson.